After lunch committee, everyone. Sorry for the delay. There was some problems with YouTube. I'm just kidding. We had a really lovely lunch. Okay, first item on our agenda, though, is to talk about the Wyoming Coordinate Plane System. After our last discussion, LSO has provided us with a revised bill draft, so I'd actually ask Luke to maybe walk us through this.
Madam Chair, Committee, this is 23 LSO-0137 Plane Coordinate System Amendments.
And for people watching online, we have Luke Plum, one of our LSO attorneys.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. So within this bill, it says, Madam Chair, Ellis has discussed with some helpful discussion. There have been changes made to this bill draft from the one that was provided in August. And primarily, the difference here is to, yes, address the plane coordinate system. And so this bill begins with a new duty for the Department of Enterprise Technology Services. They're required to establish and promulgate rules and regulations governing the use of a system of plane coordinates established by the Office of the National Geodetic Survey, NGS. That's through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And this is to define and state the positions or locations of points on the Earth's surface within the state of Wyoming. This bill requires that the department adopt the North American datum of 1983 or a successor standard of an equivalent or greater quality, and that shall be known as the Wyoming Plane Coordinate System. Any rules and regulations promulgated by the department shall comply with what is currently in statute. It's Wyoming Statute 34, 25, 102 through 108. And that specifically does address plane coordinates. In this bill draft, of note, to start here would be that this bill draft does repeal the previous section 101 and then part of another section that specifically addressed zones. Wyoming statute very specifically outlined what the zones were for the state of Wyoming. And the reason that's been removed is because a new system is currently in the works with the National Geodetic Survey. It'll be called the National Spatial Reference System of 2022. Its implementation is going to be delayed, but it's my understanding that the zones will be changing. And considering that, trying to give this process more to rulemaking authority through ETS, they'll be able to adopt, they have to begin with the standard that is currently been adopted by Wyoming. That's the NAD 1983, but it gives them that ability through the successor of an equivalent or greater quality that gives them the ability to, when the new system is promulgated, move towards that system. And so in this bill draft, I've removed any of by repealing those specific sections that specifically outline the zones, it gives ETS more flexibility to address those. And so then within the actual statutory construction of the plane coordinate system, in Title 34, the primary changes are just to call this, it's now instead of the system or the plane coordinate system, it's just the Wyoming Plane Coordinate System to match with the duty that is given to ETS. I have included a couple other things just within some language with the new system that's being promulgated, such as that distances should be expressed in meters to the nearest decimal of a meter, or to if it's expressed in feet, it would be to the nearest decimal of a foot. And throughout here, as I mentioned, there's just references to the zones defined by the Wyoming Plane Coordinate System instead of being specific. And then there's also a new statutory provision that allows for the appropriate use of any other datum, plane coordinate system, or geodetic reference network, as long as it complies with the information requirements for the Wyoming Plane Coordinate System. And that's just to give some flexibility as there is a transition from NAD 1983 to the new system. And so I'm just skipping through. Yes, so there are, like I said, there's several statutory sections that are affected here, but most of them are just changing it from the Wyoming Coordinate System to the Wyoming Plane Coordinate System and removing that specific reference to the NAD 1983. And as I previously mentioned, Section 2 of the bill on page 8 does just remove those two earlier provisions that define the zones and kind of adopted the NAD 1983s. That's been worked back into the Department of ETS's new duty. And Section 3 has three parts. A is that the Department of Enterprise Technologies Services shall promulgate the rules necessary to implement the provisions of this act. But then also in B, they're required to research and review the release of standards for zone parameters and promulgation of the new state plane coordinate systems by NGS. And when the new system, the NSRS 2022, is released and established by the National Geodetic Survey, which is expected in 2025 or 2026, ETS shall report to this committee specifically on the date of establishment of the new standards, the zone designations and number of zones for Wyoming, the implementation of the Wyoming State Plane Coordinate System, and any recommendations for statutory revisions. And going along with that in subsection C of Section 3 is that once the report is received, this committee shall review the provisions of Title 34, Chapter 25 to determine if there are any necessary revisions to statute, if they're advisable. And finally, this bill is effective July 1st, 2023, but the rulemaking provisions and the research and review provisions provided in Section 3 are effective immediately to allow ETS to begin right away. With that, I stand for any questions.
Thank you. Luke, questions for LSO? Seeing none, thank you. Ready? We invited ETS to testify, but they will not be joining us. Committee, you'll recall that there have been discussions with our counterparts on the Appropriations Committee about whether or not ETS is the right committee to house this particular GIS entity. So, but to date, we don't have any recommendation to my knowledge that that GIS move. So for purposes of this, I think we just move forward and designate ETS, and if we need to refine that in the future, we can look at that. Is there anyone in the room who would like to testify on this bill? Welcome. And then is there anyone online who would like to testify? No. So it looks like we have one person here. Welcome.
Engineer, I have been working with plane coordinate systems since 1960, both in the United States and all over the world. I've designed them for 3 states, Wyoming, Nebraska, and Montana, and have been associated with the work on other things with other people with the National Geodetic Survey on these. I've also done them overseas, both for the US government and for private, for other countries. I wrote the 1983 NAD legislation, originally drafted it, testified before you, and tried to answer the questions that arose. I was sorry that I could not have been at the last meeting. You had some questions, and I would like to address those if you want to ask them again, because they are important issues that you do and your constituents do have. And I feel it's very important. The draft that was just discussed, I had not seen it or been contacted about this, although I have been the chairman of the Professional Land Surveyors of Wyoming Special Committee on the proposal. And they did draft a bill in 2020 for upgrading the previous to the new reference system. There are a few minor things in that document that I had that do need to be modified based upon comments that I've received from you or some of your constituents. And with this is a very novel situation that we're in right now. As a matter of fact, on the Wyoming State Plane Coordinate System, and I'm going to say this emphatically this way, I designed a set of 3 separate mapping systems for the various interested groups of the GIS surveying and engineering community. The State Plane Coordinate System itself follows the tradition that was started in 1934, 1935. Wyoming in 1976 was one of only 8 states that did not have enacted legislation on state plane coordinates, although from the 1950s at least, the Wyoming Highway Department consistently and always used the state plane coordinate system itself in all of their engineering, design, and construction. I do know that for a fact. I also had contact with the Bureau of Public Roads, the person who was the director of surveys at that time when the Wyoming started this, and he gave me his files on this to see what was going on. The legislation that I drafted follows the mode of the 35 era and the 70 and the 83 era, 86 era, so that people like attorneys who get involved in this have a consistent understanding of the legal ramifications if they are going to use these documents. Because not only can they be used in real property and engineering design, they can also be used in proclamations, et cetera, to define other kinds of boundaries or contracts or projects to be done with total understanding of where these places are on the ground. With that, Madam Chairman, I would like to open to questions from you.
Thank you, Dr. Stilton. Questions for our witness, Senator Landon, then Senator Salazar?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And sir, my question to you is, you have some of that written down somewhere? You're a wealth of knowledge, and I just sort of imagined this bill going out on a floor somewhere in a chamber, and some of the things you have relayed to us are really valuable. I'm just curious.
I have more than that. I have written a book of about 450 pages. It's called Map Projections of the United States. It's only in paper format right now, but it has been completed. It was completed last year. It discusses all the systems that have been used around the United States.
Thank you. No.
Senator Salazar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Doctor, I'm going to rely on your expertise because this is, but I do have a responsibility that I want to protect my constituents. Can you assure me that is this information tapped by either the National Geospatial Agency or the National Reconnaissance Office? Are we getting into any of that with regard to Wyoming?
Dr. Stilton?
I'm not quite clear what you're saying.
Well,
I'm going to have to ask you another thing. I've got an ear infection and I can partially only hear. So if you speak up a little better.
Is any of this geared toward the National Reconnaissance Office or the National Geospatial Agency? Does any of this connect with any of those federal agencies' use?
Dr. Stilton?
Only if it's in the public record or somebody makes it available, it's their data. In other words, let me say, tomorrow you call me up as a land surveyor to survey your property, and you say you want Wyoming state plane coordinates on it, and I give it to you, all right? Now, if you want that to be made available, fine. There is no authority in the proposed legislation, and there's no authority that I know of anywhere else that says I must take and file a document with those agencies or anybody else.
Okay.
Further questions for the doctor? Representative Winter?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. My question is, and I've asked this question before, and so far I don't have the answer, I guess, but how will this type of a survey affect existing surveys? In other words, if you have a piece of land surveyed and it's got a certain description, and this system comes along, is it going to come up with the same corners on the property? And if not, how is that going to affect the county clerks and so forth?
That's a very good question.
Dr. Stilton?
This goes back also to covering real property law. The real property law that we use in the state of Wyoming started its development in the 13th, 14th century in England. And there is a long history about real property on how we retrace boundaries, how we adjudicate any conflicts in boundaries, etc. This is just another, in effect, This is just another way of saying, I think it's here, but if there is a contest, it will not supersede or oversee unless it is judicially and legally handled. If we do have occasionally, we do have conflicts like this arise, all right? And sometimes they're due to a surveying problem. Sometimes they're due to a inability to find the evidence, all right? I use coordinates quite a bit because I was raised on them, and in fact, in my education and training, but I saw how powerful they were. To give you an example, I was up in Goshen County some years ago, and we were looking for a township corner. And nobody had a record of it. And it went right by the state highway. The state highway had not found it when they went through there in the 50s. They did find a section corner a mile to the west of it. And I found the township corner of the actual township 3 miles south as well. And putting coordinates on those, I computed the estimated position based upon the survey records of the original surveyor of 1878. Now, I knew that there was probably an uncertainty of maybe 10 or 15 feet, but it was better than I had before. And another land surveyor and I went out and we started digging, and sure enough, at the place I said it was, we found the original survey monument of 1878. I've done this several times, and the oldest one I've ever done was back in upstate New York, where I hold registration as well. I retraced an 1783 Indian treaty boundary that had been totally obliterated in the middle of the city with an uncertainty of less than a foot. And that was important because it was a case of rights, legal rights between the Native Americans and the settlers afterwards. Coordinates are very important as a tool. They're not the overall always the answer, but they can assist us in our work as we go along. The biggest user of the coordinates is the GIS community, by far the biggest, because that is in effect telling them where they could find it. And as I said, I've designed 3 mapping systems, one of them the state plane coordinate system. The other 2 address the GIS community statewide, based upon what I know and what I've heard that they have used, so that when the National Geodetic Survey does the recomputations, et cetera, they are going to do, it will automatically compute these for those communities as well. So the plane coordinate system is only a subset of it. It's the only one that is set to deal with real property. However, it is permissive. It is not mandatory. Now, City of Cheyenne has a local, what they call a control system for their subdivisions, et cetera, that every surveyor must tie into when they do a new subdivision. They're going to use the state plane coordinate systems, as I understand it, instead of their local coordinate system, which they're going to modify and change here shortly. But the thing is that their regulatory body there has decided that they want to be on a uniform or a unified system. I hope that answers it. It's kind of windy.
Follow-up, Representative Winter?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. So what you're telling me is that if there is a discrepancy somewhere, that can be worked out amongst the officials.
Yes, I am. We already have the remedies, which is the courts and the legal issues. It does not modify anything in that tradition that dates back since pre-colonial times.
Okay, thank you.
And the other thing is, it's very interesting, if you want your boundaries defined in plane coordinates, we can do it, the corners, monuments themselves. If, however, you still would like to use the aliquot parts of the General Land Office PLSS system, or you want meets and bounds, these are all can be worked together. They are, in effect, not in conflict. It's your choice and your, let's say, your attorney's choice. Excuse me.
Further questions for the doctor? Representative Sweeney?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So just to be certain, I noticed in your testimony, you mentioned the 2020 piece of legislation that you had worked on. I'm assuming you've gone through this current bill draft that we have in front of us today.
Only about an
Dr.
hour,
Dr.
because
Stilton?
I did not receive this until after, when I got back from Denver yesterday, I had an urgent message from a professional land surveyor up in Thermopolis. And he said, "Do you know about this?" And I said, "No, about what?" And so what he did was, I said, "I have no way of getting everything. We're just about to," it was almost 5 o'clock. I said, "Will you email this down to me?" He said, "Well, I can't, but I'll have my engineering firm next door do it for me." And they emailed, and I read it. This I have not studied, but it does not follow the tradition of the NAD 83-86 legislation. All right, in the 83-86, we defined the zones, and we defined them very specifically based upon a philosophy that was established and the technology available in 1935. And that was that surveys would be done, excuse me, to a minimum accuracy assessment of 1 part in 10,000. Now we can do that with no problem whatsoever. In the statute of 83-86, if you look in there were specifications written about accuracy standards and what you were going to do. Technology has changed so fast since then that the equipment that was being used in the 80s is gone. All right? We now can, instead of a surveyor back in 1950 beating his head against the wall trying to get 1 part of 10,000, we can get 2 parts per million. That's 1 part in 500,000 in less than 30 seconds of a satellite observation of a constellation of satellites above us. All right? We don't need to worry about that problem. What we really need to worry about is that people understand how to use the system correctly and how to apply it correctly and interpret the results that they get from it. That's our important problem. Now, over the years, I have had to work with attorneys who have faced with state plane coordinate systems, and they've had a hard time, but when they finally got to it, they said, "Boy, it's pretty straightforward for us. We understand what you're doing now. We can look for these errors, etc." I, at first glance, look at this proposal here and say that I think from the standpoint of liability issues, professional liability issues, there are going to be a whole mess of problems in here. There's a question in here that nobody's asked yet, and I'll bring it up right now. Who is responsible for overseeing this? We've never done it in the past. We've never talked about it. But it has been, and it's been my position, and nobody's contested it, it's the State Board of Licensure for Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors. Because they are the arbiters, the monitors of the professions, how the professions are practiced, and who is deemed minimally competent to practice them. Now, this is one, to give you an idea how I work in this, back in the 1970s, when I was a young whippersnapper, I was a land surveyor member of the New York State Board of Registration, which is the component, the same thing as this. The biggest thing I did for 6 years was go into hearing panels and charging panels on competency issues. It wasn't on legislation, it wasn't on, even though I looked at over 850 applications in those 6 years, it wasn't that. It was the issues of professional liability and professional responsibility. And I believe because that board, and it has a public member, at least one public member on it, that board is staffed with professional engineers and professional surveyors from the state, from private industry, and from consulting industry, and they understand the practice, day-to-day practices going on in their field. Yes.
I'm going to stop you there for a second and explain a little bit about what's going on. So at our first hearing, we talked about how NAD 83, as you mentioned, is kind of the older system, that we were aware that there were some efforts away at the federal level to revolutionize or modernize the national system.
National Spatial Reference System.
Correct. And so those were supposed to have come out, I thought, in 2022 or sometime, but because of COVID, we've heard that there was a delay. So this new system that should be coming online has been identified as like a 2025 potentially system. We've worked with our LSO attorneys. We can't adopt a statute that references a standard that hasn't been yet created, because that would create a delegation of authority. We can't just say, we'll adopt something that hasn't even been written yet. So what we commonly do in the legislature is we leave it up to our experts. So it can give you a number of examples where we set a broad policy, but we tell the agency, we want you to write rules that have the full force and effect of law. They go through public comment. They have to be reviewed by the legislature and the governor before they're finally set. So recognizing that we want Wyoming to start transitioning and using and getting people on board with this 2025 system, this was a way of saying, we'll entrust our Department of Enterprise Technology Services to do the rulemaking on it. Because we are all lay people, and we've all been looking at this, and I don't know about my colleagues, but the more I learn about it, the more I realize I don't know. And so that's the concern, is why are we trying to legislate something that should be left in the hands of professionals? So in my view, when you talk about the liability, it would be ETS who would write the rules, but it would be things like the board of your colleagues and you involved in that technical rulemaking to make sure that we're doing it the proper way. Because right now, if we don't do anything, I worry that we're not keeping up with other states who are adopting this new system that's on the horizon. So that's a little background of why this bill is structured this way. And I don't know if that impacts your thinking on it, or if you have any other feedback, or I am kind of curious to just know your thoughts.
As of this moment, I know of 2 states that have already gone forward with the new state plane coordinate thing. As a matter of fact, we could back this up to the existing system and make it go forward from there. All right? The problem within the National Spatial Reference System is not just only COVID. If looking at the parameters that are being put together in this system, we have designed an entire new technology of not only surveying and mapping on the Earth, but on surveying and mapping the geophysics, the GIS, et cetera, et cetera. And as we speak, the staff at NGS is spending tremendous amounts of time. As a matter of fact, at least once a month, there's a national webinar on some aspect of this for 60 to 90 minutes on these things. And I monitor them very carefully. If you had told me when I was with the Department of Defense and we were working with the beginnings of this, that this is what we would be capable of today, I would have sent you out over to Evanston, okay? That's how crazy some of the things were thought about. The thing is, the statute as it is drafted can be set up that you pass it down that would be applicable to the current system that's in existence, and would transition itself automatically when the new system comes on, whether it be in 2024, 25, 26, 30, or whatever. Right now, the agency that's handling this is short on manpower, one, short on getting funding to get these programs online. There's about 30 or 40 programs in that set of data that they're trying to generate, the National Spatial Reference System, that you don't see in this legislation. There are other parts of it that are just important components, okay? And I understand where you're coming from. Maybe we should go back to the drawing board and go back to NAD 83 and use that, act it, and then let it automatically roll over when it rolls over. They keep saying 25. I just don't know.
So, Mr. Stilton, I think that's the question, though, is I think the reason we brought this bill, the reason I care about this is that we're not keeping up and we're not moving forward. This issue has kind of, I think, been hidden from us for a long time. And so I think we're finally starting to get our arms around the value in not just the real property piece of it, but also, as you mentioned, what this means for, rivers moving and just all the capability of scientific knowledge that we could be benefiting from. So that's why this bill is here. And, the information we received early on was if we don't do anything, then nothing changes, essentially, that we're not utilizing the best technology, that we can't just revolutionize the NAD 383, but.
We have a system in place now, the 1983-86 bill. That's still enforceable. All right? It still can be used and applied to the same problem. All right? Traditionally, across the entire United States, when we've made these changes between systems, it's been a rewrite of the bill, just as it's doing right now. Since 1992, there have been about 15 to 20 different National Spatial Reference Systems promulgated and attempted to use as they try to put the pieces of the puzzle together, but they have never gone public. We have stayed dogmatically with the NAD 83 system that we used in the 86 legislation. And we can go back to that. When the new systems come out, we will have a crossover. One system will start, the other system will go offline. However, the records will stay available so that we can directly correlate with a known accuracy between the two systems, so that if something comes up and there seems to be an anomaly, we can figure out what the anomaly is and why it occurred.
Representative Newsom, did you still have a question?
My question tied in with Representative Sweeney's question. As we look at this legislation, and as I tie back into the chairman's question, it seems our goal is to try to write a statute that allows for the upgrading of the system as that happens, not just in this next iteration, but in iterations after that as well. And that's, I believe, what we're trying to get to. And I'm wondering how we get there. And if it's not with this particular wording in this particular bill, what would you suggest?
Based upon your thoughts, what I'm thinking right now is if you want to get let's say the horse in front of the cart, I can go back to the drawing board and take the NAD 83-86 statute, strip it of the components that are obsolete. It'll still reflect all the intents that it has, but it will also have available in it, which we have in the draft that I prepared in 2020. All right. Those things that would roll it over as the authority, the National Geodetic Survey, does it when they do it. NGS has officially stated, and they have done this all the way back to World War II. Anything that goes as an official action of their organization goes into the Federal Register. It's nothing new to them. Matter of fact, there's one of those documents is about Wyoming. They went in there and they wrote the statute about the metric system being used on state plane coordinates in Wyoming. There is a separate Federal Register document. I have it. They did a whole group of these because there's two definitions of the meter that are seriously impacting our commercial and our legal system. Okay, I can do that for you if you ask me to. And I won't charge you for it.
I think our problem is we're running out of time. This is our last meeting. We're running out of time. This is our last meeting. Representative Newsom.
So the 2020 information that was that a bill that was filed? Was that a bill that was ever brought to either house? Was that something that you
It was
proposed?
filed, as far as I know.
Dr. Stilton, it's usually a custom for you to ask questions through the
Oh,
chairman.
I'm
That way
sorry.
we just
I'm
maintain
sorry.
some decorum. You're
Okay.
fine. Thank you.
Senator Ellis. It was filed, and there have been two documents that have come out since then that I've received them secondhand. I have had no comments received from the LSO over the past 15 to 18 months that I've been working on this.
Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you for your testimony today.
You're welcome.
All right, with that, I think, is there anyone else? I saw some people come in. Would anyone else like to testify on this bill? Okay, thank you. Public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? I don't think a motion's necessary at all. Okay, seeing no action, or seeing no motion? You didn't have your mic on, I didn't hear you. Okay, seeing no motion, the next item on our agenda, and we are ahead of schedule, is the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and committee. Thank you again. My name is Darren Westby. I'm Director of State Parks and Cultural Resources. Want to introduce to my left, your right, Deputy Director Dave Glenn, as well as Deputy Director Sarah Needles in the back, here to help with any questions that may come up during our quick update. Again, I want to thank you all for taking the time yesterday. It means a lot to us that you take time out of your busy schedules to come put boots on the ground and see what our awesome team gets to do on a day-to-day basis for your constituents, our visitors. I think it's just really important to put context to situations and problems that we bring to you that you can relate back to, whether it's at Kurt Gowdy or Glendo or at one of our historic sites or any of the other recreation areas that we get to manage. And hopefully we can crosswalk some of those issues or problems into a good solution with your knowledge and expert experience with yesterday's tour. And consequently, all the other previous tours. I get the fortune to get in front of other committees, and they don't get that experience of coming and witnessing what we get to do on a regular basis. I'm assuming they go to other things that they get a tour, but hopefully our tours are a little bit more fun than some of the others. So I might be biased, but definitely appreciate the time that you took. Madam Chairwoman, just I'll try to be brief and keep you on schedule as much as possible, but I would like to just give you a little bit of update of where we are since the last go around, last meeting that we had as well. I think I talked a little bit about the visitation yesterday. We're obviously seeing a downtick from 2020, but I think everybody's seeing that. And I think I know from a staff's perspective, they're breathing a sigh of relief that they're not being just bulging at the seams, but I think they're hitting their groove at a good visitation mark. ARPA and Watt granting, the apps were due at the end of August. We got 118 applications and pretty close to $72 million worth of requests for that 12 million of ARPA and 2 million of Office of Tourism funding. And so obviously we're in the process of paring that down, ranking them, analyzing to ensure that they meet the requirements of the guidelines, or at least what we feel that they meet the requirements of the ARPA guidelines. And then we'll do that prioritization, and then we'll send it back out once we hit that list of what we think is appropriate. We'll get a further refined application from those applicants to try to ensure that what we put into the portal, which is the ARPA portal that hopefully you guys will be seeing some of the reports come out of, and some of the reports that have to go up to the federal government to ensure compliance with that as well. That'll be one more check on the guidelines to ensure that we're being compliant with those applicants that we're giving funding to. The last thing we want to do is to give funding to somebody through these mechanisms, and then one reason or another, they come back and they weren't compliant with the guidelines, and then we have to figure out how to get that money back. That would be horrible for us and for the applicant recipient. And so anyway, that's the process. We're hopeful to have all this funding on the ground by the first of the year, and we're excited to see where those projects are coming. The Lander Trails building, you all last year gave us authority to go forward with the negotiations and purchase that Lander Trails building. We are, unfortunately, I think we talked at one point that she was in not the greatest of health, and unfortunately she has passed since our last meeting. Luckily for us, and I shouldn't say luckily, fortunate for us, she's a very big proponent of the program. The renters, our program, the Trails program that's up there, and put things in motion to ensure that if our sale proceeds, that it still is in her wishes. So we're very grateful for that. We have had those inspections that you all requested to ensure that we're not taking an environmental hazard on, and it will cost us more down the road. Preliminary findings are not showing that we have anything of that nature in that building, but we're waiting for that final report. We also have had the buildings appraised, so we should be getting that appraised value. And then once we get those two and everything falls in line with what the bill, what you authorized us to spend the 2.8 million is in line with the appraisal, we will take that as listed in the statute. We'll take that back to the State Building Commission to get the final approval to go forward with that purchase. So just want to give you an update that things are still moving forward on that. Hot Springs update. Again, thanks again for taking another tour to see the situation that's going on up there. I want you to know that we have sent out letters to those concessionaires that we've had issues with, contractual fulfillment issues with. Those letters are in their hands, and we'll see where those go. I think the RFP is ready. We're waiting on a few pieces to fall in line before we hit the street on the RFP up there. But we're hopeful, very hopeful with some things that are moving up there that we can all have something to be proud of here pretty soon. So not trying to be elusive on that, but there's some probably more executive session conversation that's being had elsewhere that I'm not really too privy of. And so, but we're very excited to where we see this thing going finally. We met with, to Senator Ellis, or Chairwoman Ellis's request, we met with the Select Tribal Affairs Committee to give them a briefing on the Sutton parcel that you all authorized us to keep going forward with in a bill previously. But we wanted to continue our effort in transparency, wanted to make sure that that committee is aware of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and why it's so important to the state and to our culture and history. And then our contract with our reservation system is coming up this year, and we will be going out to RFP we might end up with the same company, but our big effort that we're going to try to push even harder is the customer service aspect of that reservation company. So I wanted you to be aware of those items that since we've last talked. On the cultural resource side of the house, again, thank this committee for your invitation and the opportunity for our grant recipients at that spring meeting to have those Cultural Trust Fund grant recipients come and not only show you how proud they are of their product and what they're doing in your districts, but also to show their appreciation of what this trust fund, the Cultural Trust Fund, does in your communities and their communities. And with that, I guess the reason I'm kind of marking on that is the next Wyoming Cultural Trust Fund meeting is in Casper on November 10th and 11th. And if you have interest and are in the area, I know you're extremely busy, but if you'd like to see how those grant processes, how that grant process works, how they go through each grant, how they talk to each of the applicants, they're very, very passionate in what they do and why they're bringing forward the application. So I extend that invitation. On the human remains side of the house, that position that you guys granted through the budget process last year, you granted us the authority to spend half general fund to fund half of a position to oversee the human remains portion of the statute that you put into law that requires our state archaeologists to go anytime there's a human remains found to go out and do the investigation to find out whether or not it's archaeological or if it's criminal or what have you. And we testified in front of you several years ago about how inundated the state archaeologist is, and he was grateful enough to have some help from the University of Wyoming biological anthropologist at the time to try to help with some of those studies. But so that's why we came to you with the request to fund a half of the position, then UW would fund the other half of the position. In the meantime, we're in negotiations with the University of Wyoming to get that put to bed and get that position hired. But there's a twist, as always. There's always a twist. And so what we're going to do probably is just go out and try to find a part-time position to fill that our half of the position, so we can get that body coming and helping our state archaeologists to keep running. And once we get the negotiations with UW, hopefully we can fill that position into a full-time, and they can get those individuals utilizing that individual in the classroom as well.
Thank you. Director Westby, is the twist involved like who has the hiring authority or the ultimate person or the entity that gets to select the hire?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Like, is it UW that gets to pick the candidate, or is it state parks when you have it funded half and half?
If it was a dual employment, it would be both. The position resides in our agency, so the supervision would be in our court at this point. And that might be some of the consternation on the UW side, as you can imagine. And so that's why we can't wait around another year for us to negotiate this. We need to get that half position coming and online so we can keep fulfilling the obligation of the law. The Wyoming State Museum, you guys granted some funding to do level 1, level 2 study for either a new building or an expansion, and that level 1, level 2 study was put out to RFQ. We have a contractor on board, and hopefully they'll start doing their study here relatively soon once the contract's dry. So we're excited about seeing where that study comes to fruition. There's a possibility I know there's not much of the ARPA funding that's remaining out there, but there is a possibility that the art community and the Wyoming Arts Council, through our agency, will be asking the governor for some funding through the ARPA remaining funds to try to help. There is still a need in the art community to get those funds in the artists and the artist community's hands, and so there might be a request coming down the line for that. Just trying to keep rolling. Some of the other interim work, I think I touched on a little bit of that at the last meeting, but in an effort to keep you up to speed on some of the other committee legislative work that is incorporating our agency is at the Transportation Committee. Chairman Landern has been helping us out with this one, but there's 22 LSO 19, sorry, old eyes, I'm not being able to read my own typing. there's ORV safety and insurance proposed draft bill that passed out of that committee, so that'll be coming forward. And then there's LSO 23, LSO 20. That's the ORV operation, and there's going to be some discussion about operation in a right-of-way. And Chairman Lannon, if you have anything more to add to that, but more to come. That's coming up next week, so probably more to come at the next meeting. The Agricultural Committee, we have a draft bill 203 that's discussing recreation on state trust lands, and that's going to be held in mid-November to kind of hash that out and see where that goes. In the judiciary, I think I talked on this, but the state park ranger retirement draft bill to include our full-time law enforcement rangers passed out of committee with that 23 LSO 91. So we're appreciative and excited about that one for sure. And then in appropriations, we have a supplemental request that will be going forward, and we're excited to be in front of you today and try to fill any of your questions. Obviously, I don't need to go through the list of bills that you guys have been working over the interim, but really appreciate all your efforts. Probably more importantly, on the just to stress, one of the bill that kind of came out of the first interim committee and we're really appreciative of is that the ability to use our fees. I talked a little bit about that yesterday, and without that ability to use those fees, we'd be closing parks or eliminating parts of parks to try to make ends meet and keep things open. So having that flexibility of the use of the fees, whether it's at 60% or 50%, I know we've talked on the side with some people about what would be more palatable when the bill actually gets to the floor or what have you. We're agreeable to discussing those percentages, but just having the ability to use those funds for not just maintenance, but operations is key for us. And you probably saw a little bit of that while we were out at the park yesterday. It's not just all maintenance at a park. There's law enforcement, there's fee programs, there's all sorts of those things. So Madam Chairwoman, really briefly, that's a quick agency update on where we're at, what we're doing, and stand for any questions or sit for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Director. On the fee flexibility, I think one concern I have is that appropriations doesn't feel blindsided somehow. I can't recall if we sent them a letter notifying them that we have that bill, or if you were planning on briefing them when you're doing your rounds of budget hearings. Do you plan on telling them about that bill, or do we need to be doing something more?
Madam Chairwoman, I can sure put it in my update on everything that we're doing. I believe we're going to be meeting with them towards the middle of December, probably the 15th, 16th of December is when I'm trying to get it scheduled, at least our agency, to be in front of them. I don't have any plans to be in front of them before that. I think their meeting actually is next week. And I'm not on that agenda at that point.
Senator Guru, do you have a thought of how we can better communicate and best communicate with our Appropriations Committee?
Well, Madam Chair, not that I speak for Joint Appropriations Committee, but just speaking for myself as a member of it, I would think a letter from the chairs to them to saying that this bill's in draft would probably be the smart play. Like electeds talking to electeds. Thanks.
And I too will update them. We'll hit them from both sides.
Okay, questions for the Director? Senator Landon?
Madam Chairman, thank you. Director, I just wanted to this is not a question. Appreciate your report to us. I wanted to throw out a thank you to you. I also, among other things, have been chairing an effort on the Exhibit and Wayfinding Committee here on the Capitol Square. We talked about that a little bit this morning. Your folks from your part of the world have contributed greatly to that effort. Looking in the back of the room, also Diane's folks from the Office of Tourism. It's been a real collective effort and really have appreciated your folks. I think we have some good suggestions coming forward, and that's really all they are. Off of that committee is a recommendation to the State Building Commission and to our Management Council, but your folks have played a big role, so thank you for that.
Director?
Chairwoman Ellis, Senator, thank you for those kind words. I think I briefly touched a little bit yesterday about the ability to have a lot of passion in our agency, not just for what they get to do every day, but the positions that we have breeds just passionate people. And so I'm very fortunate to have that in my agency and the high quality of team that brings. So I really appreciate those comments. Not just what like Sarah and her team are doing with you on the wayfinding and all that, just the partnerships that we have with Office of Tourism and working with them on this as a collaborative effort from the executive branch through the Outdoor Rec Office and their funding to help stand that office up until hopefully we find something else to help shore it up on a permanent solution. I think things are clicking right now, and I'm really appreciative of the collaborative nature, not only with the executive branch, but with the legislative branch as well, and everything that we're trying to accomplish. It definitely takes a team, and the conversations that were had yesterday, I think, were amazing. And I know it lifted me up in hopes that we can continue moving the bar forward. So thank you.
Okay. Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Director Westby, I just want to commend you as well. In the 6 years that I've been here, you mentioned many times that your agency is run like a business. You were tasked by this legislature, I don't know when, to do that, and that's what I've witnessed. And I appreciate the fact that we heard yesterday too, there is a food vendor that takes the opportunity to operate a business off the edge of Kirk Gowdy State Park. And so there's free enterprise developing from your efforts. And I don't know, I just think that what I've seen is a good thing, and the people that you have that work with you, you all work well in tandem. So my congratulations to you and your efforts at the helm. Thank you.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My questions is mainly with the Lander Trails building, a little concerned about that, and particularly with the situation with the owner. Is there anything that we can do to help to kind of speed up the process with anything that's going on right now with your assessments that still have to be done, or the appraisals or whatnot? And then also, just as a follow-up, do we have a plan B if something does fall through with that?
Director Westby.
Chairman Ellis and Senator, thanks. I don't know that there's anything you can do. I think you guys have given us the tools and the power and the authority to go out and get the appraisal and the inspections done. Unfortunately, I know the wheels of bureaucracy move slow. Sometimes the private sector moves slow as well. Everybody has their issues. And so I don't know that there's anything you can do to help speed that up. I'm just fortunate enough to have the inspection done. That's not an easy thing to find somebody that's qualified and capable to go do that kind of inspection. The appraisals, if that's anything like what's happening in Southeast Wyoming, finding an appraiser that can do commercial is not easy in and of itself, let alone if it was any residential. So I'm fortunate that we're at the stage we're at, even though it's really slow, unfortunately. But and again, fortunately, with the estate, with the kind of her wishes to keep moving forward with our agency on the purchase of this bill or purchase of that property was important to her to list that. So very fortunate for that, because it could have very easily gone a different way and we would have been stuck something else. And I guess as to go back to your plan B, our plan B, I guess, is we just hopefully keep the building in the estate. We can keep renting from the estate until they sell it to somebody. And then plan B is we just keep trying to negotiate a good lease. It's not a good business move, to go back to Representative Flitner's, Co-Chairman Flitner's comments, is part of us running like a business made us think about that. And it's a good, sound business move to purchase that building. And so we're going to keep going down that route. Hopefully everything falls in place. But yeah, thank you for your question.
Okay. Further questions for the director? Seeing none, thank you for your update.
Great, thank you.
And we are very, very ahead of schedule. So I don't know what it looks like. I think we can continue. I see that column there was hiding some folks. Before we do that, committee, how about we just take like a 10-minute break? We'll come back at 2:45, just one last, grab some coffee, use the restroom, and then we'll finish strong. Just tell me when we're ready, Heather. We are back online. For those of you watching on YouTube, you are watching TRW. Before we move to our next agenda item, I just wanted to offer a directive to LSO so I don't forget. Will you help us draft a letter to the Appropriations Committee, making them aware of the funding flexibility bill that we've got for state parks?
Absolutely, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. All right, with that, the next item on our agenda is outdoor trails and pathways. Representative Sandy Newsom, if you want to get everyone up to speed on what's been happening since our last meeting, there has been a small work group, and I'll let Sandy explain that.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, as a directive from our last meeting, as we talked about funding the Office of Outdoor Recreation, we were assigned a little work task force to explore how that could happen, how we could go forward with funding the Office of Outdoor Tourism. And we came up with a few ideas. The bill that you see in front of you is to create an outdoor recreation trust fund. So similar to the Wildlife Trust Fund that we just heard about and the good work that they do, I think this falls in line with the many trust funds that the state of Wyoming has currently. And the good work that happens in putting money aside and then working off of the interest on those trust funds. And we thought that that would be a good way to do this. So this is a first step to create the trust fund and to create the trust fund income account so that we could have money to spend out of that account. We came up with several ideas on how to fund that trust fund, and we're still working on that piece of it. Some people have suggested taking some of the ARPA funding to start that trust fund. And so we would like to have those conversations. Jeremiah was part of that working group, as was Director Westby and Representative Haroldson was on that call. We also had a constituent of mine, Rebecca Watson, who has done extensive work in the outdoor recreation funding, kind of nationwide. She was a member of the Continental Divide Trail, and she has retired in Cody and reached out to me and has been a great source of information on how we might have several funding sources for the trust fund as well as the income fund. So thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I'm going to put you back on the spot. We have draft legislation in front of us, but we also have Mr. Ryman, so I don't know if you have a preference on whether or not you want LSO to walk us through the provisions of the bill, or if you'd like Mr. Ryman to do that. I'm just looking for some feedback on how to proceed.
I'm going to defer to Mr. Ryman and see if he would like to do that, or if he has a preference how we talk about this whole concept.
Jeremiah?
Madam Chairwoman, I wasn't prepared to, but I'm certainly happy to.
Now
at
I'm
your
looking over
discretion.
at LSO. Do you have a preference, Luke?
I would be happy to run through it. I think I could provide a quick
How about-
overview of the bill.
How about we do that, and then we'll have Jeremiah testify. Thank you.
Absolutely. Luke Plum, LSO, here to discuss 23 LSO-0289, the Wyoming Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. So in this bill, it does create the Wyoming Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. It creates some new statutory sections in Title 36 regarding within state lands, and it does provide a funding mechanism for the trust. And so there's just a short title that this should be known as the Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund Act. It does provide some definitions. And just as a note here on the staff comment on page 2, the commission is the Wyoming Parks and Cultural Resources Commission that is already pre-existing. That was a decision of the committee working group to give that over to the existing commission instead of creating a new trust fund board here. And then continuing, there's just a few additional definitions, the division of state parks and historic sites, the income account that'll be created for this, and then the definition of outdoor recreational infrastructure is just the various types of outdoor recreation that may be funded through this program. and then also the trust account. And so then moving forward into the new section 203, that is where the trust fund and income accounts are created. The trust fund account can consist of those funds designated to it by law or any monies that are collected by federal grants, other contributions, bequests, donations of that nature. And it's specifically empowered to take those. It creates the trust account to be inviolate and constitute a perpetual trust fund to be invested by the state treasurer. And then in the next section, the Wyoming Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund income account is created. And this is specifically where the state treasurer shall credit all the earnings from the funds in both the income account and the trust account. These funds are, this account is ultimately what would be used to provide grants. An important note here is that no funds out of the trust, or the income account, I'm sorry, the income account may be used until the trust account equals or exceeds $50 million or until July 1st of 2026. And that is in line with what was, I guess there was a previous bill draft. It was 2020 House Bill 177, and that was the basic structure of this legislation. And within that bill, it required the corpus to reach $4 million. But once again, during the working group discussion, it was thrown out there to maybe increase that to 50 million. So the committee may wish to consider that. And I think it just thought there was $50 million in the trust account. The interest off that might be more to work with in the grants. And so that is, that's where that comes from. And just kind of continuing moving forward, any person can give money to either the trust account or the income account. If they specify in writing where it should go, if not, it would go specifically into the income account. And then subject to legislative appropriation, specifically expenditures from the income account shall only be for grants awarded by the commission. That's no more than 80% of the funds can be used for those grants for planning, design, improvement, and maintenance of existing or potential outdoor recreational infrastructure tied to local government entities, the state or the federal government. And specifically for this, it does include grants for the purchase of public access easements necessary to enhance those lands. Also, these grants can be used for related education and public outreach. And then the other 20% can be used for necessary administrative expenses incurred by the commission to operate the trust fund. So then getting into the actual trust fund administration, the commission shall receive and evaluate applications for grants from the income account as previously authorized. And there is a reporting requirement that the commission provide information to the governor, the Joint Appropriations Committee, and the Joint TRW Committee no later than October 1st each year with respect to the federal grants, state appropriations, or any other gifts, grants, donations received and credited to the account, and any grants and granted awards or funds dispersed by the commission, and those dispersed by the commission to the division, the State Parks Division. The commission, their next duty is that the commission shall review and monitor grants to grantees and the expenditure of all monies from the income account, and that they should adopt rules and regulations in accordance with the Wyoming Administrative Procedure Act to carry out its duties, including establishing a procedure for grant application submittal, establish criteria for grants from the income account, establish criteria to require matching funds or other in-kind contributions from grantees. And here on page 9, there's one more staff comment that the committee may wish to consider whether there should be any additional guidance as to the matching funds or other in-kind contributions, that what that criteria should be, and how if you'd like to address that with the commission any further to meet the policy objectives in this bill draft. And in addition, the commission should evaluate, rank, and prioritize grant proposals that would have the greatest impact on citizen utilization. And in fulfilling its duties under this act, the commission may consult with other governmental agencies, local, county, or municipal governments, or any other person or nonprofit organization. This staff comment on the top of page 10 was just, once again, the committee working group discussed involving local governments in the process of awarding awarding grants and dispersing funds. This allows the commission generally to consult with local governments at their discretion, but may just be another area that the committee might wish to consider. In addition, the commission can accept or decline federal grants, other contributions, and any other money from any source. And so when it comes to disbursement of the grants from the income account, it is subject to application approval and legislative appropriation. They can award grants that are consistent with those rules that the commission is required to promulgate, and they shall have the discretion to determine the amount of money awarded under each grant and any conditions that would be attached to it. There's a biennial audit requirement, as is common with trust funds. It requires the director of the Department of Audit to audit the trust and the income account and provide copies to the legislature. And that is the new statutory sections for the Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. There were a couple additional amended sections. The first is just generally to include the duty that the commission shall administer this trust fund as created by these new sections. And then the funding mechanism relates specifically to sales tax. Under this, the distribution, under 39-15-111, where this new section has been inserted, this is specifically taking 10% of the 69% of the funds that are of the sales tax that are credited to the general fund. And so it really is just until the corpus of the trust account equals $50 million or until July 1st, 2026, whichever occurs earlier. There was discussion of other methods of funding, certainly such as the mountain bike use fees or a NAICS code or potentially other tax items. I did just want to address to the committee, I've kind of, in looking at this and having some discussions, and granted, I haven't had the time to fully flesh this out with the Department of Revenue, but it's my understanding that the Department of Revenue does not currently really operate a NAICS code system, that it would potentially be a big lift for them to try and address this, like to actually create a system where they could, if you wanted to parcel it out to be specifically recreational gear or something of that nature, that it may be difficult or it may require some more work and effort on their part to make that happen. I should say that I think 10% of the share that is provided to the general fund that goes to the state, the 69%. I did see in 2021 that, and I think Mr. Raymond may have additional information on that. In 2021, there was $446 million that was moved to the general fund. So taking 10% of that in a year, if it were to be $44 million, it would get close to funding the account fairly quickly. But if the committee wishes to consider any other methods to fund this or any additional appropriations directly to fund the accounts. And finally, in section 3, this act is effective immediately. This came out of the prior legislation, that 2020 House bill. That legislation was effective immediately, but the committee could choose to do what they would with that. But with that, I think that's a full run through of the bill. If they would stand for any questions.
Questions for LSO? Okay, Representative Haroldson.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chairman. So Luke, real quick question with this. One of the things, if you look on page 12, line 24, we talked about the sales tax option like you had mentioned, but we also talked about the possibility of lodging tax being a backfill as well, as this would be directly benefiting lodging tax. So can you speak towards, obviously you didn't mention that, you'd mentioned other forms, but just why don't you, if you don't mind, why don't you mention or kind of speak to that and what the logic was behind kind of avoiding that and going more towards this 10% pull off.
And then LSO, or if Representative Newsom wants to, or no, I guess you were on that task force too. I was going to say you could have addressed it, but Luke, did you have a response?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Haroldson, that was initially kind of contemplated in here. I'm sorry, I didn't say lodging tax specifically. I think that still is an option. I think it could be considered as one of the funding methods. That was ultimately decided to have that removed from this bill draft, but it is available if need be. I know that the lodging tax amounts are far smaller, and as opposed to taking 10% of the general fund piece of this. So I think it certainly still remains an option.
Madam Co-Chair?
Yes, Madam Chairman, and actually, I directed LSO to remove that reference from the bill just because I felt like, I mean, I had heard that those folks were not at the table for your interim work or your extra work, so to speak. I just felt like it wasn't fair. I felt it was more important that we have that discussion here in committee, so I asked that that be removed.
Further questions for Mr. Plum? Okay, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Ryman, would you like to speak on this draft legislation or this issue, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann. I'm here today primarily to represent myself, although there are occasionally local government implications in this conversation. So I may wear a variety of hats and I can't get rid of them. Madam Chairwoman, I don't come to this discussion with really any concerns about the draft legislation, but I did put together a document that has been handed out to kind of guide some discussion points that I found in my review of the legislation. And I'll try and go through those page by page. On page 2, as has been referenced, the approach for distribution of this funding will go through the Parks and Cultural Resources Commission. I don't have a concern about that because right now the funding mechanism comes entirely from state funds. In our conversations as a working group, there was some conversation about what if it goes into those local funds and what would the representation then be for that contribution. Because this doesn't go there, I'm not going to present any concerns, but if it did, as the conversation evolves, then I might come around and want to have some discussion about a seat on that particular commission that represents local governments or some other mechanism to ensure that that local voice is heard. So I just wanted to point that out. Madam Chairwoman, moving to page 3, there is a definition for outdoor recreation infrastructure. I'm concerned that the definition is a bit too specific and perhaps overly limiting. As you can see, it says trailheads, trails, shooting ranges, all things that I think we would consider outdoor recreation infrastructure. Cell phone towers, I don't know that I'd quite get there. Maybe tangentially. At the end of it, it appears to have a reference that is supposed to be broadening, but it has the term related. And so that takes me, I'm not an attorney, but I've trained a little bit in this, that leads me to believe that it has to be something related to trailheads, trails, and those other things. So I just did a quick search to see if I could come up with a more broad definition, and I found something from Utah, which I included on the sheet there, which is facilities and installations needed for the public to access and enjoy the state's outdoors. Pretty broad, and certainly what I would consider to be outdoor infrastructure. So that may be one thing that you consider in terms of changes on the legislation. Madam Chairwoman, moving to page 4, I just highlight we have $50 million in here with what I think really is the working group's initial target. But I believe we come with aspirations of a higher goal in this, not unlike what we had with the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust. We started out with an initial $100 million contribution, but our goal was always at a minimum of $200 million, which thankfully we were able to achieve that this year. So I don't know that that requires a change here, but perhaps some mental thinking about what is, in fact, our higher goal in all of this. And maybe that would require some change. Just for some context, $50 million trust, if we're doing really well, is probably going to generate about $2.5 million on an annual basis. And the way this is set up, roughly $500,000 would go to the department for its Office of Outdoor Recreation and what it's trying to do there, and an additional $2 million for grants. Not insignificant, but frankly, in the grand scheme of things, not a considerable amount for the work that is going on and what we've seen over the past couple of years in this space. Madam Chairwoman, moving to page 6, I was comfortable with the percentages distributed here, but I wanted to just perhaps bring a concept that we've been discussing in joint transportation around WyoLink as we consider a trust fund there. And that is taking 10% of the interest income that is generated and just putting it straight back into the pot. Of course, that will reduce the amounts distributed to these two categories on the front end, but over time that's going to grow, and it's going to help us grow that corpus if that is one of our goals. So I provided the language that comes from that draft WyoLink bill and might suggest it to your consideration here. Madam Chairwoman, also on page 6, I pause around the lines 19 and 20, outdoor recreation related education and public outreach. I don't think any of us in this world have a concern about information at a trailhead, a new sign to inform visitors about their responsibilities, what the resource looks like. I tend to pause a little bit around marketing campaigns and other things of that sort and wonder if that's not better addressed by a partnership with the department and locals, with lodging tax, with the Office of Tourism. I myself would suggest removing that language, but if not, be certainly more specific about it being perhaps a secondary purpose of this funding and a lesser priority.
Senator Grew?
Chairman, if you don't mind if I ask questions as we go here a little bit on that one. When I read that, I kind of took that to mean that in an outdoor recreation at a trailhead, that you'd be talking about, hey, there's active ranching activities going on and, you know, next door to this or next door to that, more informational stuff. I didn't quite take it, I think, the way you took it. Am I missing something?
Jeremiah Ryman?
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Guru, I asked about the purpose of this language. I understand it's a historic remnant from the previous drafting of this. I don't think any of, again, from my conversations with a small subgroup around this, anybody has a problem about talking about ranching operations on a trailhead sign or something of that nature. My understanding is that this, in the previous version, generated from a different purpose that I wouldn't be supportive of personally.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And any other questions? Maybe this is a good time to, since we're combing through this page by page, now that I'm looking at lines 11 through 17, this is 80% of the funds in the income account can be dispersed for grants awarded by the commission for the planning, design, improvement, or maintenance of existing or potential outdoor recreational infrastructure tied to local governmental entities, the state or the federal government. And then, so I guess I'm wondering, I'm just wanting to understand what tied means to local government. And then because I'm always wearing the tribal relations hat, do we need to maybe look at that and add tribal? Do we want these funds to be eligible for certain tribal outdoor rec projects? And so just those are my only two thoughts. I refresh my memory of why we use the word tied, if you have an answer. Or Mr. Plum, if you have a thought.
Madam Chairwoman, I believe that this is coming from the 2020 House Bill 177. I can't speak specifically to what the original drafting of using the word tied was. I think there's just some thought here that it'd be outdoor recreational infrastructure. There'd need to be maintenance and planning improvements for those. And I think that's why it was somewhat, trying to say it would be tied to a local government or some sort of entity that would be able to maintain those.
Okay, thank you, and feel free to continue.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I would have no opposition to tribal governments here. I suspect, some sort of a state entity would have to have an ownership or management stake in that particular effort, but just a thought there.
Madam Chairwoman, if I could just kind of insert a little bit there
Director
too.
Westby, thank you.
Thanks. I think supported by instead of tied to could be a language that kind of is conforming to what we're trying to accomplish with the existing ARPA grant funding as well as the Office of Tourism granting, just to ensure that we have some entity that's supportive of this, and it's not just us going out and trying to do something in an area in which the local government isn't supportive of. Am I correct there? Thanks.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chairwoman. I would support that as well. I would also offer that from my perspective, a lot of this work is conducted by nonprofit entities in the state. So I would personally want to ensure that that work could continue, understanding that it might be on property of the state, the federal lands. I mean, you saw that out at Gowdy State Park, I assume. A lot of that work is conducted by volunteers or organizations that I and others are involved in. So. Madam Chairwoman, moving to page 7, and I only mentioned this here because I had no other place to put it, but in a couple of conversations that you and I have had, as well as at the end of the conversation that was had in Thermopolis, is a consideration of does this tie to a state plan for the investments that we're going to make? So that might be something that you would consider as part of this legislation. I don't come with any exact suggestion for you at this point in time. I would want to ensure that there's some flexibility in there because things do change depending on the length of a plan like that, or it's important to invest in particular projects, but it might be something that could be considered in response to your interests. I would be supportive of that and would be supportive of some sort of a tie working with the local governments to develop such a plan as well, and probably other stakeholders. Madam Chairwoman, moving on to page 9. In the middle of that page, it has this language around evaluating, ranking, and prioritizing grant proposals, which certainly always has to happen in these sorts of things. One part of that gave me some pause was the language, the greatest impact on citizen utilization. I think that can be interpreted a number of different ways. One way perhaps is to say where the most users are. So a Kurt Gowdy, which admittedly on some days doesn't need more visitation. We need to move people elsewhere in the state. You could perhaps interpret it that the greatest increase in terms of utilization. So say in Niobrara County, having recreation infrastructure might be a smaller number of users, but it might be a greater percentage of the overall population that's utilizing that. I want to make sure we're clear and that we don't get into a legal conundrum where we're arguing over what the greatest impact on citizen utilization means. I also wondered whether we shouldn't try and emphasize some sort of a regional distribution, not as a absolute mandate, but at least a consideration to ensure that this money does move its way around the state and that we get others actively interested and involved in this particular part of our economy. And finally, Madam Chairwoman, I just wanted to point out the distribution here so everybody understood what this mechanism is. So on the 3rd page of the document I provided is just the quick statutory reference. So if you don't know, and there's a flow chart on the back of that, right now, the state has its 4-cent sales tax. 69% of that, really 70%, goes to the state, and the remaining 29% goes to local governments. So when we were having the conversation, I was considering or thinking about whether you might just be grabbing 10% of the full 4%. This language obviously doesn't do that. It only grabs 10% of the 69%, so the state share. But there is a broader picture when it comes to the state sales tax. On the final page of the document, you heard your staff talk about the distribution amounts. I pulled this up this morning from the Department of Revenue's 22 annual report. And as you can see, LSO is correct. In 2021, the state's share was $446 million. In 2022, that increased to $501 million. And so I just put under there for quick reference, at 10% on 22 figures, you would fund this in 1 year. And you can see what it would look like. 1%, of course, it would take you 10 years in order to get there. Just so nobody's confused, but if you start looking at the local share number that's on this document, that includes the share we get from the state 4%. It includes all of the options at the local level. So we don't get 50% of the state share is what I'm trying to point out here. It's a much bigger pot that is captured in that figure. Madam Chairwoman, I did want to just talk about a couple of other things, the other options that were mentioned in the staff comment. Your LSO staff are correct. I had a conversation with the director of the Department of Revenue as well around NAICS codes. They don't currently categorize receipts based on NAICS code. So this would be an approach that is a bit more difficult for them. Now, with that said, in Texas, they're not dissimilar to what Wyoming does, but they have their department simply do an estimation of what they believe is coming from those goods. And then they take that portion and devote it to their outdoor recreation trust or to their activities. So there are easier ways to look at NAICS codes and try and account for those monies. The second concept, the mountain bike user fee, obviously the department has considered that, may consider it in the future. I just wanted to provide some context around that quickly. It's not a one-for-one for the concept that the department is looking at, but Oregon currently institutes a $15 tax, excise tax on the purchase of certain bikes, in particular those bikes over $200. And in 2021, they took in $908,000 from that particular tax. Oregon's population is about 8 times our size. So if you just tried to run through those calculations, you're looking at roughly 120,000, assuming we purchase bikes at the same rate that they do in Oregon. So not insignificant, but a number that I wanted you to have. The other thing that I would just say, as a mountain biker, it's one user group amongst all of these, and there's obviously nothing in here that says, one, they have a voice, or two, and that's not to say they don't. I don't want to minimize what the department does, but it also doesn't say that it's going to go to bike optimized trails as an example. So you might consider that as you look at that. With that, Madam Chairwoman, I've probably said too much. I am supportive of moving this concept forward and will continue to work with you as you do your work on it.
Any questions, Mr. Ryman? Seeing none, thank you. Director Westby? And my apologies, I should have deferred to our agencies first, as our custom, but I didn't, and I'm really sorry about that. So please feel free to offer any comments.
Madam Chairwoman and Madam Co-Chair, I don't think she would want to do that. I have a very dirty car, but thank you. Again, I always sit in amazement that we have the products that we have friends and supporters come out and take their time to try to help bolster what we're trying to do. So hats off to Jeremiah, and thank you for not only being a user, but a very big supporter in what we do and what we're trying to accomplish. Madam Chairwoman, committee, this is a bill that I think can actually move the needle. We've been bake selling the heck out of this office outdoor recreation, trying to get it off the ground, scraping pennies over at my agency to try to get it off the ground. I think the last session, all I've heard was, show me some proof of concept, show me that this office is needed, show me that this office can be productive. And through the help of Diane, Director Schober and her team, and what you guys have done, it's created an office that is not only shown what its needs and its capabilities are, but I think the vision for diversification of the state's revenue streams, the state's health, is shown with not going bake sale anymore. Let's think big. And I think that's the other term I kept hearing from some of you, was to think big. You're not thinking big enough. This is a start. This is a start to get us where we are. And I agree with Jeremiah on the 50 million. When we talked about the 50 million, that's what we need to get us going with what we have in partnership with the Office of Tourism today. That's to keep the office running, put some granting monies on the ground, and try to develop those products that we can truly move the needle in outdoor recreation and what we want to do. I've also heard a lot of the comments about, well, we don't need any more people coming to our state. Well, they're, as Deputy Director Glenn talks all the time, they're here. What we need to do is develop more product and where we can disperse these people so they're not all concentrated on lands that we want them to be or not want them to be, because they're here and they're going to continue to do things that we don't want them to do without good direction. And that's what the Office of Outdoor Recreation can do, is to provide some of that direction, to provide some of that guidance to not just state entities, but local government, local entities that are trying to put more product on the ground so we can get people to do the right thing when they're recreating, dispersing them. But we have the option right now to get control of this and stay out in front of it. And I'm very grateful for the effort that Luke has put together in crafting this. Thank you again, Representative Harrelson and Representative Newsom, and everybody else that was on that subcommittee to come up with this, and a lot of great work going into it. And I really appreciate where we're headed with this.
Questions for the director? Ready, seeing none. Is there anyone online that is registered to testify? There's no one online. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this draft bill? We see Chris Brown. Okay, and then we had one other person raise their hand, and I can't see behind the big column. Hold on. Oh, by everyone, Representative Kinner is with us today. This is exciting. Welcome, Representative. All right, Mr. Brown.
Chairwoman Ellis, Chairwoman Flintner, members of the committee, good afternoon. Chris Brown, representing the Wyoming Hospitality and Travel Coalition. We don't have a position specifically on the bill, but I, of course, would like to answer your call, Chairman Flintner, related to dialogue around the lodging tax as a funding mechanism. When our industry worked with the executive branch and the legislative branch to pass the statewide lodging tax in 2020, it was the culmination of 3 years worth of hard work, worth of working with industry. The statewide lodging tax was a concept that my organization had fiercely opposed for the history of our organization up until those 3 years getting it done. And we're now 3 months into the first biennium where the statewide lodging tax is funding the Office of Tourism. By getting the Office of Tourism off of the general fund, ballpark $20 million per biennium was reverted back to the general fund. And so I hope that that demonstrates the willingness of the industry to be collaborative and to find solutions as we continue to talk about these hard decisions on how do we find funding for funding these great ideas. There is no question that outdoor recreation plays a significant role in the overall visitor economy across our state. But it would be our position that diverting funds from the statewide lodging tax this early, without really some track record and history to look at and say, this is what it's done, this is where we've gone, this is how much we have, we feel like that would be a premature decision. That being said, the folks that got up and spoke before me are our friends and allies in the industry, and we are absolutely committed to continuing to work with them to find solutions as we continue to move forward, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak today. And so with that, Chairwoman Ellis, I don't want to go on long, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Brown? Okay, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
And we had one other person raise their hand. Welcome. Please identify yourself on the microphone for the record. You just turn on that green light, and then all questions come through the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, committee members, for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Megan Riley. I'm a new staff member with Wyoming Outdoor Council. I'm taking over the slate of projects that Kristen Gunther had been working on. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce myself to all of you. And it's been a joy to be part of the process here today and listen in. As far as the bill right now, I wanted to commend the committee for pursuing funding for outdoor recreation. I think we all know that it's a growing sector and there's a lot of pressure on the trails that we have now. And as interest in outdoor recreation opportunities continues to grow, adequately funding trail maintenance and administration of our parks is vitally important. So I think pursuing a funding structure is really commendable work. And I also appreciated the language on page 9, line 26, that pressed for consultation with agency experts in determining some of the projects that are awarded funding. I think it's important that we have agency experts to make sure that any new trail development is done in a way that minimizes impact to our natural resources. And with that, I will cede the floor to the committee if you have any questions.
Questions for Ms. Riley? Can't see. Seeing none, thank you. Okay, anyone else? Public comment is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? The bill's been moved by Representative Flitner and seconded by Guru. I think we've had some, I think going through this page by page probably makes good sense. So page 1, any amendments on page 1 or page 2? I think just deleting the staff comment, there was just a notation, but no action necessarily needed. Is that right?
Madam Chairwoman, that is correct. Unless the committee wish to have a different entity administer this trust fund account, these accounts, that would be the only thing.
Okay, so that's gone. Page 3, Senator Guru.
Sorry, Madam Chair, thanks. Page 3, line 9, I believe. Jeremiah, I might need a little help on this. What's that? Page 3, line 9? Or, 10 through, line 10 through 13. Yeah, I think so. So strike lines 10 through 13 and add the language that's on the handout that Mr. Riemann sent to us, saying facilities and installations needed for the public to access and enjoy the state's outdoors.
Moved by Senator Guru, seconded by Representative Banks. Discussion on the amendment.
One quick question for the good senator.
Representative Banks.
Madam Chairperson. I question the use of the word states outdoors and if that makes it restrictive in that all of the funds then end up sort of enhancing state parks, for instance, rather than say a city green belt or something. And so I wonder if we should remove the word states in that, just question. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Grew.
I'd leave that one. I'd like to hear somebody else's thoughts on that. I think the states meant all of it, but I don't know. I don't know when to limit it.
Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. What if we just said enjoy Wyoming's outdoors? Would that be a better?
Is that a friendly amendment?
Very friendly.
Representative Banks, is that a friendly amendment to your second? Okay, so the motion is the definition of outdoor recreational infrastructure means facilities and installations needed for the public to access and enjoy Wyoming's outdoors. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say no. The amendment's passed. Any other amendments on page 3? Seeing none, any amendments on page 4? Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I heard the concept on the 50 million. Is that, I mean, I'm not sure of the funding mechanisms, or if there's going to be ARPA funds left that could be applied to something like this, but to start with, does the number need to be that large on the 50 million?
Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I believe that the idea was that that is a number that gets us to fund, Director Westby, correct me if I'm wrong, about half of the outdoor recreation office at this point. That maybe would be about 500,000.
Yeah, Madam.
Director Westby.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Newsom, and Representative Sweeney. The 50 million target was, if you just go with the 5%, that's roughly about 2 million that would be set aside for grants, and about using the percentages that are in this bill, and about $500,000 a year for operations. So that's to operate the Office Outdoor Recreation, to do their job, facilitate the granting process, facilitate all the outdoor rec collaboratives to ensure that we're getting the ideas gathered in a way possible. So that's the reason for the 50,000, is just that's what we need right now.
Okay, further
Or
questions?
50 million, sorry, right now.
Further questions? Representative Sweeney.
I'd propose an amendment to put that at 25 million, if I can.
It's been moved. Is there a second? It's been seconded. Discussion on your amendment, Representative Sweeney.
I generally agree that the 50 is needed, but I'm concerned in this upcoming legislature that might be too aggressive to start. So,
Okay. Senator Guru.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't know. I don't want to go all JAC on you, but yeah, please do. I mean, like I say, I have this argument every time I get home from a session with my wife. She says, take out the garbage, and I say, can I take out half the garbage today and then half the garbage tomorrow? And right when the bag hits me in the face, I know that I'm back home. Because on JAC, that's what we used to say about everything. If you say 50 million, we'll say 25. And so I don't know, that's why I kind of like to keep it there. And in so much as you asked a question about ARPA funds, a lot of talk right here, the halls, about ARPA funds I've heard the last day or two. What I recall when we left these hallowed halls last March is there was $57 million in ARPA dollars that were not expended. I've watched the B11s quite closely from the governor's office and watched the allocations of ARPA dollars that have gone out the door. It's pitifully low. I mean, really, out of $3 billion, that there's 200 million that's gone out the door. I haven't seen it. So there's plenty of money floating around here if we have the will to do this, if whatever the amount that will turns out to be. So I'd like to see it left at 50 and see where we go. see if we can get appropriations to work on maybe different streams of funding. We're gonna find out tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock that we have a bit more money than we thought we had based on the new credit report that's coming out. We know that we have that 57 million. We know we'll be able to get reports in December about how other funds are doing, what's been expended, what's going to get carried over. We're going to find out a lot of information between now and the time this group or its new form reassembles in January. So I think we'll know more then, but I hate to see us leave anything on the cutting room floor now.
Okay, further discussion, Representative Newsom?
So, thank you, Madam Chairman. The way I read this, the 50 million is not required for anybody to fund it right now in the full amount. It just gives us a threshold at which we can start taking money out, either that or the date of July 1st on 2026. So I think that leaving the 50 million where it sits is a good way to go. Thank you.
Okay, we have an amendment on the floor. Just for clarification, I know we're talking about a dollar amount, but I don't know, we're not actually appropriating any money. Do we need to do a roll call vote on this, or is a voice vote fine? I think a voice vote, that's what I'm thinking. Okay.
Madam Chairwoman, I believe that's correct.
All those in favor of Representative Sweeney's motion, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no.
No.
The amendment's failed. Okay. Any other amendments on page 4? Page 5, we have a staff comment. That does not need to be resolved. I think we just had that conversation. Is that right? Okay, so the staff comment will go away on page 5. Page 6. Madam Co-Chair?
Per the suggestion of Mr. Riemann on page 6, line 14, I would suggest that we remove tied to and insert supported by.
Okay.
Oh, and Madam Chairman, did you have also something you wanted to?
Yeah, Madam Co-Chair, so we've got your motion that's been moved and seconded. I was thinking, what if we just took out lines 14 and 15 altogether? And then on line 16, put the words "and may include grants for the purchase of public access agreements." So what this would say is grants awarded by the Commission for the planning, design, improvement, and maintenance of existing or potential outdoor recreational infrastructure, and may include grants for the purchase of public access easements necessary to enhance, and then I think a conforming amendment would be to enhance such infrastructure instead of these lands. So I took a different approach, but I'm happy to defer to you if you want to debate your idea more. Representative Newsom?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I believe when we talked about this, that having them tied to or supported by local entities or state or federal government is an important piece as I can create Sandy's fabulous outdoor recreation nonprofit, and I can raise $100,000 and I can get a grant, and in addition to that, and build something. And then if Sandy's fabulous outdoor recreation fund, trust fund goes away, who's going to take care of that infrastructure? So I think it's important that we keep it tied to some long-term entity. You know, as we know, we have nonprofits come and go. And if there's nobody to take care of that infrastructure once it's built, that's problematic. So I think the partnership of long-term entities, local government, that sort of thing is kind of an important piece as we're looking at these grants.
Great suggestion. Committee members, Representative Flitner has an amendment to leave it, or to change on line 14, instead of tied to, supported by local government entities. Is that the only part of it? I didn't miss anything, did I?
Nope.
Okay. All those in favor, please, or any other discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. That amendment's passed. Any other amendments on page 6, Senator Schuler?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Along with that, on line 15, I'd like to add federal and tribal government. So, and tribal, if that works okay, state or the federal and tribal governments. Should be probably governments.
Okay, everyone understand the amendment? It's been moved and seconded. Senator Baru seconded it.
Yeah.
Any further discussion on that? All those in favor of including tribal governments, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say no. That amendment's passed. And then I do have a question on my last, on the last piece of it. On line 15, it says, you know, it's supported by one of these governmental entities. It says, and for the purposes of this subparagraph, shall include grants for the purchase of public access easements necessary to enhance these lands. I'm wondering if that needs, how I'm reading that means there's 2 requirements then for the grant, that there has to be some kind of easement, some public access easement. And I don't know that that is necessary or if that should be permissive. Does that make sense? I'm trying to think of a project where you maybe don't need some kind of easement tied to it for land. Because we talk about infrastructure not just being a land improvement, it could be something else. Is shall the may enough? Okay, I'm looking back here, Director Westby and Mr. Ryman, and I think it's because we tinkered with that definition of what infrastructure is. I just want to make sure it all ties together. Okay, so I'll make this motion. On line 16, strike the word shall and insert may. And then on line 17, strike the words these lands and insert such infrastructure.
Such infrastructure.
Such infrastructure. I can't remember if we don't like using the word such in our drafting. These infrastructures. Alyssa, do you have a friendly amendment to help me? But I think you can see what I'm getting after.
I'll second.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Madam Chairwoman, I certainly understand. I just wanted to briefly address your comment, if I may. It was inserted, the and for purposes of this subparagraph, that was inserted considering the definition of outdoor recreational infrastructure. I do understand your point about the shall and how that could be read to include that. Committee's pleasure whether they'd like to change that to may. And certainly it could be necessary to enhance, I know it'd be a little wordy, but the outdoor recreational infrastructure.
That's fine. So committee, the reason I'm saying this is on line 17, we say easements to enhance these lands. But if you look at the definition we adopted on page 3, we left it a little more broadly. So that's why I'm trying to keep it equally broad to match. So I guess the amendment would be striking the shall, the may on 16, and then on 17 saying easements necessary to enhance such outdoor recreational infrastructure. And if that's okay with my co-chair, she's nodding her head yes. Discussion on that amendment? My co-chair, yes. Any discussion on that? Question being called. All those, Representative Banks?
Madam Chairman, just a quick question. On line 15, where it's and for the purposes of the essentially public easements, correct? Are what you're trying to do that it's for this or this? Should that maybe be an or?
That's a good question, Representative Banks. On the and or. I think and's okay for what it's worth. The more I look at it, I think and's okay. The people watching online, this is where the magic happens. Okay, so you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Amendments passed. Any other amendments on page 6? Senator Guru.
Yes,
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion on the proposed amendment to remove lines 19 and 20 on page 6.
Question.
Question being called. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The amendment's passed. Any other amendments on page 6? Seeing none, anything on 7? 8? 9? Senator Schuler?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Where it's on line 20, the greatest impact on citizen utilization, I would like to strike impact and put increase.
Okay, is that the end of your amendment?
No, I
Senator
had
Schuler?
another one, but I can't remember what it was.
Okay.
I didn't write it down. It was something to do with regional, utilizing as much as possible.
Madam Chairman,
Outdoor recreation.
I might be able to help.
Madam
Help me
Co-Chair?
with that one.
The suggestion was to regionalize the grant approach, much like, the trust information that we heard this morning, so that they're looking at it, in a regional. So that might have been what you were thinking about in terms of proportioning the grants.
Madam Co-Chair and Senator Schuler may be saying on line 20,
Yep.
those projects that will have the greatest increase on statewide citizen utilization.
There we go.
That's an idea.
Yep.
Open to suggestions. Senator Landon?
My only caution there would be that I could foresee projects coming forward that would merely be for the preservation and maintenance of certain kinds of facilities that are experiencing increased use. And I guess I could see some projects maybe coming that really the goal would not be to increase participation on a particular trail or whatever, but to preserve it, to take care of it. That's my only caution.
Okay. Senator, did you have any friendly amendments? So we had an amendment to change the word impact to increase on line 20, and then a suggestion, if the bringer of the amendment is okay with maybe inserting the word statewide before citizen.
Yes.
Is that okay with the bringer or the seconder? Okay. Any questions about the amendment? Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no.
No.
The amendment's passed. With that, the staff comment goes away. And then one question I do have for the LSO drafters. Remind me your drafting conventions. Do we need the word "and" on line 3 at the after the semicolon when you have a list?
One second, Madam Chairwoman, I'm just gonna double check real quick.
So for clarification for our committee members, when you have lists and statutes, when you have them separated by semicolons, if you leave them blank, I think it's presumed that it's "and," so that those are all the things they can do, but if you wanted it to be "or," you have to specifically do "or." Is that the right drafting?
That's how I understand it, Madam Chairwoman. I think this is just that it's to carry out its duties under this act, including rules to do all of these things in the list.
Okay, thank you. I just couldn't remember. Anything else on page 9? Page 10, we have a staff comment we should look at. I don't think that requires any certain decision-making unless anyone's got anything. Anything on page 10? Page 11? Page 12?
I have none.
Representative Newsom?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm going to suggest or amend that we, on page 12, line 8 through 14, that we delete that language at this point.
Okay, it's been moved. Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the proposed amendment? I'm just to clear, so I'm following along with what you're thinking. Representative Newsom, what was your logic in wanting to remove that portion?
Well, I think we need to work on that a little bit more. I don't know that I'm comfortable with the way that is going to roll. So I think it might be detrimental to the bill as a whole.
Okay. Any other discussion on the amendment? Senator Landon and then Representative Haroldson.
Madam Chairman, thank you. I'm really conflicted on this one because I think it really is important for us to take forward something that represents a level that we think is appropriate. And that's why I like the fact that we stayed at 50. Long ways for this to go, and we know that it'll probably get trimmed all the way down. But it feels like to me that the first thing that our appropriations colleagues are going to ask is, well, how are you going to fund this? And we will look at them and say, well, it doesn't say anything in the bill, that's up to you guys. Or it doesn't say anything in the bill, we'll have to come up with that. So that, I almost feel like we need to suggest something. So that's kind of where I'm going to vote. Thank you.
Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I think kind of in some ways it's already been asked, but I think I think the concept's a great concept, but the funding model is the sticky part. That's always the sticky part. How do we fund this? How do we make this reality? Is there a 10% pull off of sales tax or you know, and I'm sorry, I'm taking another jab, lodging tax possibly. And we need to come up with that. I do believe if we got it, we kind of almost send them a shell without a solution, which I don't, like I said, I'm conflicted kind of on the whole thing. I love the concept, but at the same time, I think this funding structure is our biggest issue. But if you go in there and completely pull that element out, I think we might have, I don't know, I believe that we probably have just send forward a skeleton with no heart in it, so.
Very Halloween appropriate metaphor. Thank you. Representative Newsom.
I would amend my amendment, if my second is okay, to do 5%, to change that from 10% to 5%.
It's been a friendly amendment to change the 10% on line 8 to 5%. Discussion or explanation?
Yeah, no,
Representative Sweeney?
Could you, pertinent to this is line 1, where it says revenues earned under 3915-104. What exactly is 3915-104?
Representative Sweeney, if I'm not mistaken, it's sales tax. And if this, depending on what we do with this, I do think we're missing some language about the use side of it. So we can amend that later on, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think that's what it is, sales tax.
So more specifically, is 3915-104 the lodging tax? No?
No.
Okay.
Okay, we have a motion. Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of Representative Newsom's motion to change it from 10% to 5%, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say no. The amendment's passed. We're back on page 12. I'm going to look to LSO. Are we missing the corollary in 3916-111?
Madam Chairwoman, I think how, with this current language in here, it would just take the sales tax. If you put it, if you go into, which is, yeah, specifically sales tax, to answer Representative Sweeney's question, if you did want to also take it from use tax, I think that those are different and it would be a different pot of money. It is that almost exact same language, but it's as opposed to sales tax or use tax. And if you did insert that in there, that'd be fine. I believe, I was trying to find that information, the use tax distribution to the general fund in 2022 will be $54 million.
All right, committee members, I've just raised that in my years of serving on the revenue committee, anytime you did anything in 39-15, you would have to ask, well, did we look at it in 39-16? So that would be the proposed amendment, would be to have a paragraph on lines 8 and 14 added to 39-16, 111B. That's the motion, just what we usually do. Seconded by Senator Landon. Discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say no. That amendment's passed. Any other amendments for page 12? And then finally, we're on page 13. Maybe for the people in the working group, and I left that call early. I did participate in it, so the Senate was represented, but I left early. Was there discussion about why this would take effect immediately? I worry that we don't give our Department of Revenue a chance to plan, like their internal structure of getting ready for some of those distributions to flip. Yeah. I move on page 13, section 3, to change the effective date to July 1st, 2023.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Okay, that amendment's passed. Any other amendments for this bill? Okay, seeing none, any discussion before we vote? Senator Landon?
Madam Chairman, thank you. I know we need to get through this and get to the end. I just want to throw out a couple of things I've been thinking about this interim more than at any other time that I've been in the Senate. Because on the other committee, we're considering similar type legislation to put the issue of funding for Wyoming to bed, for example. If we could just set aside the funds and we're kind of two important things. First of all, we're taking forward something that I think is important for the rest of our legislative friends to know and understand. Whether or not we can take any of this to the finish line or not, that almost becomes secondary to the fact that at least we're sharing the message that we've learned throughout this whole interim, and that is this is a growing sector of our economy. Second piece, that I do like the idea that we're suggesting that we take this off of sales and use tax, because guess who's generating the sales and use tax in our state? A lot of it's being generated by these people coming and visiting and spending dollars in our community. Finally, my thought to the committee would be this. There's always reluctance because of big price tags. Always remember that if we set up a trust like this and the state gets in trouble, we can go get the funds. Always. That's what we can do. We can do that on the Hathaway funds. We can do that on any of those funds that we have set aside for a specific purpose. So it's not like we're just spending $50 million. We're just setting it over here to inure to the benefit of something that we know is growing faster than any other segment of our economy right now. So thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Any other discussion? Senator Grew?
Yeah, just to take off on Senator Landon's thought, we just heard earlier today, we put $200 million, just last year we finished funding $200 million to the Wildlife Trust Fund. And today it generates hundreds of millions of dollars for the state of Wyoming. You don't get anywhere if you don't get started. I hope this discussion goes to the whole floor and that everyone gets to take part in it, so we can really have an honest discussion about diversifying our economy. Or not. Find out who wants to and who doesn't and what that means. I think it'd be a really helpful discussion for everybody in the state to have, to be a part of. So that's why I was kind of saying maybe, but I did listen to my senior members, former members of appropriations, to say maybe we should put some money in there. I think the appropriators will look at it and say, and weigh it out with other needs, whether it's school funding over here or this for other fundings to come, and may make a different decision. But I hope that the discussion about this gets to the floor so we can at least have it, a global discussion and talk about it. So just to see where everybody's at. So I think good work of everyone. Hopefully you vote yes. Thank you.
We could certainly put outdoor recreation in the funding model for K through 12, so hold that as a placeholder. As just a point, my co-chair and I received a text, the Wildlife Trust, when it was first created, its initial contribution was 15 million, to your point of starting from somewhere. Okay, further discussion? Seeing none, let's do a roll call vote.
This is a roll call vote for 23 LSO 289, Wyoming Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund as amended. Senator Guru,
Aye.
Senator Landon, Senator Salazar, Senator Schuler,
Aye.
Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Harrelson, Representative Jennings, Representative Knapp, Representative Newsom, Representative Sweeney, Representative Williams, Representative Winter, Co-Chairman Flitner,
Aye.
Chairman Ellis.
Aye. All right, that bill has passed. And we'll head to the session and committee with your indulgence. I think we've got a number of bills that my co-chair and I will sort through whether or not they start on the House or Senate side. Certainly, if you have a strong preference in any of the bills we've worked on this last year, starting in a certain chamber, please let either of us know. But we'll just try and make sure we're balancing that workload as best we can. But please let us know if you have a preference on any of the bills. With that, we are at the end of our meeting. I think it's important to acknowledge that this is the last hearing of TRW for some of our members. We have celebrated my co-chair, but Representative Sweeney, Representative Williams, thank you for your years, and I'm just making sure I'm not missing anyone, of serving. And I can tell you, I've really enjoyed working with you these last couple of years on the TRW committee, and just appreciate all that you've done for Wyoming. For anyone that's ever run for office and had the pleasure of serving, there is that old Teddy Roosevelt quote about being in the arena and being marred by blood, sweat, and tears, but it's better to have known all of that than to have never dared greatly. So you have dared greatly, you have served Wyoming greatly, and we are just so thankful for that. And if anyone wants to make any other closing remarks before we end up shop today, just want to say thank you. This has been it's been an honor for me to serve with all of you. Senator Landon.
Madam Chairman, just a couple of things. First of all, thank you for recognizing our good friends over on the side there. Representative Sweeney, thanks for all you've done for Wyoming, particularly on this front. I'm looking back at the back row because all that you've done for hospitality and tourism, serving on commissions, all the things that you've done for Wyoming. Thanks for being in the House of Representatives. Representative Williams, wish you could stay a little longer. I hope you stay involved and maybe we can get you down here in some other way. But anyway, thank you for that. Madam Chairman, I just wanted to thank you two chairmen for this interim. It's been really informative. Been one of the funnest committees I've ever served on. I've learned from every one of you. And so anyway, thanks for that. Thanks for the great work.
Well, and before we leave, I will say, Senator Grew, I know was there, but a longtime friend and mentor of mine, Clarine Law, served as TRW chair on the House side for many years. And she wrote a book. She recently passed, almost reaching the age of 90. And in her book, she talks about how serving on the TRW committee and chairing it was one of the highlights of her legislative career. And I just hope we all take that to heart. Like these meetings aren't, a pain in the butt. This is where things happen. And I just want to thank everyone for contributing and being part of it, because this is real. And I think at the end of our lives and our legislative careers, hopefully the work we've done here has mattered. So thank you to everyone. And with that, I think we're adjourned. Have a good day. Safe travels.